The silence in the room was somehow way louder than the shouting match that had just ended. It just hung there, thick and suffocating. My mother was standing by the fireplace, her arms crossed, just refusing to look at me. My older brother, Mark, was leaning against the doorframe with this little smirk on his face. It was my dad who finally broke the silence. His voice was completely empty of the warmth I'd known my whole life. "You have 1 week to pack your things and get out." Week. 7 days to take apart a life I thought was forever. They weren't just kicking me out of the house. They were kicking me out of the family, out of the only world I'd ever really known. To them, I was a failure, a screw they'd finally run out of patience for. In that one moment, standing in what wasn't my home anymore, my world didn't just fall apart, it shattered. They thought they were throwing me out. They had no idea. They were just showing me the door to a different life. This isn't a story about being a victim. This is the story of how their rejection ended up being the ordinary world redemption. And the crack in the foundation before all the shouting, there was a different kind of quiet. The quiet of things nobody ever said, of tension always bubbling just under the surface of our perfect-looking suburban life. To anyone on the outside, we were the perfect family. My dad was a respected accountant. My mom was a big deal in her local charities. And my brother Mark was the golden child, already following in Dad's footsteps at some fancy firm downtown. And then there was me, Alex. I was the creative one, the dreamer, the one who just didn't fit into the neat little boxes they'd all built for themselves. Our house was always spotless. The lawn perfectly trimmed. My mother was obsessed with how things looked. Dinners were every single night at 6 p.m. sharp, and the conversation was always polite. Always about Mark's latest win at work or Mom's fundraising events. My life, my passion for writing and digital art. We didn't talk about it, or if we did, it came with this thinly veiled condescension. "That's a nice hobby, Alex," my dad would say. "But what's the actual plan? You can't draw your way into a career with a 401k. Mark was even worse. He decided early on that his way was the right way, and he never let me forget it. He called my freelance projects doodles and would always ask when I was going to get a real job. I felt like I was constantly being measured against him and always coming up short. It left me with this low-grade, constant feeling that I wasn't good enough, that something was just wrong with me because my dreams didn't look like theirs. It was like the real me, the person who loved creating things, just didn't count. The big blow-up wasn't one single event, but more of a slow, painful train wreck. I was juggling a bunch of part-time jobs to fund my real passion, building a small online platform for digital artists to collaborate and sell their work. It was my baby. I poured every spare second and every dollar I had into it. It was a struggle, and I wasn't making much money yet. I was barely breaking even, honestly. I tried to explain it to my dad, showing him the user base was growing. The feedback was great. The potential was there. He just shook his head and looked at my spreadsheets with total disdain. "Potential doesn't pay the bills, Alex. You're 24 years old, living under my roof, playing on your computer." The final straw was when I had to ask for a small loan. A server upgrade was critical to keep the site from crashing, and I was just a few $100s short. I hated asking. I knew what the answer would be, but I was desperate. I even wrote up a business plan with a payment schedule. He didn't even look at it. Instead, he called a family meeting for that evening. It wasn't a meeting. It was an ambush. They sat me down in the living room, the same room where we opened Christmas presents. There was no warmth, no love. It was a courtroom, and I was on trial. "We can't support this. It's fantasy anymore." My father started, his voice cold. My mother chimed in, her voice trembling with what she probably thought was concern, but it just felt like pure disappointment. "We've given you every opportunity, Alex. A good education, a stable home. And you're just throwing it all away on this internet thing. Mark was the most brutal. You're a leech, Alex. You're dragging them down. It's embarrassing." All my friends, siblings are doctors and lawyers, and what are you? Starving artist living off mom and dad. Every word was a punch to the gut. I tried to defend myself, to explain that I wasn't asking for a handout, but for a little faith. I told them this was my dream, the only thing that made me feel like I had a purpose. They weren't listening. Their minds were already made up. My dream was a joke. My presence was a burden. The love I thought was unconditional. Turns out it was totally conditional on me becoming a person they approved of. And when it was clear I couldn't do that, they gave me my sentence. Get out. The rejection was total. It wasn't about money or a job. It was about me. They were rejecting who I was. And that pain, that deep, profound feeling of being unwanted by the people who are supposed to love you most, that was a wound far deeper than any financial problem. The journey into the dark that first night was hell. I went up to my room, the same room I'd had since I was 5, and it felt like I was in a stranger's house. The posters, the books, the old desk where I'd spent countless hours building my dream at was all alien. I didn't sleep. I just sat there, the silence of the house crushing me. My dad's words get out echoing in my head. They gave me a week, but I couldn't stand being there another minute. The next morning, I packed what I could into 2 suitcases and a backpack, with my laptop and hard drives. Everything else, my entire life, I just left it. I walked out the front door without saying goodbye. Nobody tried to stop me. I saw my mom's silhouette in the kitchen window, her back turned. That image is burned into my mind, her deliberately not watching me leave. I had a few $100 to my name. It wasn't enough for a deposit on an apartment, barely enough for a week in the cheapest, dirtiest motel I could find. The room stank of stale smoke and sadness. The lock on the door looked like you could kick it open. That first night, I huddled on the lumpy bed, listening to the city, feeling a kind of loneliness so deep it was a physical ache in my chest. This is what being thrown away feels like. It's not just being alone. It's feeling like you're fundamentally unlovable. If your own family doesn't want you, who will? The next few days were a blur of fear and panic. The money disappeared way faster than I thought it would. I was eating 1 meal a day, usually instant noodles from the sad little coffee maker in the room. I spent all day at the public library using their free Wi-Fi to apply for any job I could find. Barista, retail, anything. But my resume was just a patchwork of part-time gigs that didn't impress anyone. The rejection emails just kept coming, each one a fresh sting of humiliation. My website, my dream, was on life support. The servers were slow and buggy without the upgrade. Users were complaining. I tried to work on it, but how can you focus on code when you have no idea where you're going to sleep in 2 days? The shame was always there. This heavy cloak I couldn't take off. I felt like I had failure tattooed on my forehead. After a week, the motel money was gone. I crashed on a friend's couch for a few nights, but I could feel I was becoming a burden. The pity in his eyes was almost worse than my family's. Anger. So I left. That night, for the first time in my life, I was homeless. I ended up in a 24-hour bus station, sitting in a hard plastic chair clutching my backpack, just pretending I was waiting for a bus. The cold went right through to my bones. Fear was a living thing, circling me in the dark. That was my rock bottom. No home, no family, no money, no confidence, just nothing. I was angry. I was grieving the family I thought I had. And underneath it all, I was just so profoundly sad and alone. But it was there. In that bus station in the coldest hour before dawn, that something tiny shifted. I looked at the other faces around me, the tired travelers, the other lost souls, and I realized something. My family could take away my home, but they couldn't take my mind. They couldn't erase the skills I'd worked so hard to learn. I couldn't extinguish the tiny ember of my dream that even then refused to die out. It was a tiny spark in a whole lot of darkness, but it was there, and I felt this flicker of defiance. They really thought this would break me. I decided, right there in that plastic chair, I wasn't going to let them be right. The turning point wasn't some big dramatic moment. It was a bunch of small choices. It started the next day. I knew I needed two things: a safe place to sleep and a way to make money, no matter how small. I remembered hearing about youth shelters. Swallowing what was left of my pride, I walked into the first one I found. It was humiliating and scary, but inside I found something I didn't expect: kindness. A caseworker named Maria listened to my story without judgment. She looked at me with respect, not pity. That day she got me a temporary bed in a youth shelter. It wasn't much, just a cot in a loud room, but it was safe, was warm, was a start. Having a safe place to sleep freed up just enough mental space to stop panicking and start thinking. I couldn't get a normal job, so I had to make my own. I went back to the library, but this time I was hustling. I went on freelancing websites and took any gig I could get. A $5 logo, a $10 social media post, to $20 bug fix on someone's website. It was a brutal grind. I worked 16-hour days fueled by cheap coffee. But slowly, dollar by dollar, I started earning money. It was mine. I had earned it. Each tiny win was a little act of rebellion against the failure label during this time. I started talking to other people at the shelter. I heard their stories. I realized my pain wasn't so unique. We were a tribe of misfits, and we had each other's backs. That sense of community was the antidote to my family's rejection. One night, while working on some cheap freelance gig, I had an idea. So many of the small businesses I was working for needed simple, affordable websites, but couldn't afford a real developer. What if I built a tool for them? Super simple, template-based website builder for people just like me. It would be cheap, easy, and it would give people the tools to build their own dreams. That idea lit a fire in me. This wasn't just about my dream anymore. It was about helping other people who were struggling just like I was. It had a purpose. This was the new path. This was the thing that would change everything. The resolution and the grand reveal the next year was an absolute whirlwind. I lived and breathed this new project, which I called Phoenix for obvious reasons. I worked out of the library and the shelter's common room. I was the CEO, developer, and customer support all rolled into one. I built a basic version of Phoenix and launched it without any fanfare. My entire marketing budget was zero, so I just posted in forums for artists and freelancers, offering them a tool I'd built for them from a place of knowing exactly what they needed. It was slow at first. Then a few users signed up, then a dozen. They loved how simple and affordable it was. They started telling their friends. The trickle became a stream. The first month, Phoenix made $50. It wasn't enough to live on, but it was proof it could work. The second month, $300. The third, it broke $1,000. I remember seeing that number pop up. I just stared at it, crying right there in the library. I walked out, went to a diner, and ordered the biggest breakfast they had. It was the best meal of my life. With that money, I moved out of the shelter and into a tiny room I rented. It was the first time in over a year I had a door I could close that was actually my own. That quiet felt like the biggest luxury in the world. The business just kept growing. I poured every penny back into it, adding features my users asked for. I hired my first employee, another freelancer I met online. Then a second. Within 2 years, Phoenix was a real company with thousands of users all over the world. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. I moved into my own apartment, a bright space that I filled with my own art. I was financially independent. But more importantly, I had rebuilt my sense of self-worth from scratch. I had faced the absolute worst and not only survived, but built something that mattered. I had found my purpose, not in spite of the struggle, but because of it. Then the email I always knew would come. arrived. The sender was my father. The subject line was just my name, Alex. My heart hammered against my ribs. I almost deleted it, but I was curious. I needed to see what he had to say. The email was short. He said he'd heard about my website business from a colleague whose wife used it for her bakery. He said they were impressed. He said my mother wanted to see me and asked if I'd come for dinner. I thought about it for a whole week. The anger was gone, replaced by a sort of detached sadness. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had my own life, my own community. But I decided to go, not for them, for me. I needed to close the book on my own terms. I drove to their house in a car I'd paid for in cash. I walked up the same perfect lawn to the same front door. But I wasn't the scared kid they'd thrown out. My mother opened the door. She looked older. She tried to hug me, but I took a tiny step back and offered my hand. It was a small thing, but it sent a clear message. We are not the same. Dinner was so awkward. Mark was there, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. They asked about my business with this new forced respect. It was clear they Googled it. They knew I was successful. The grand reveal wasn't me showing them a bank statement. The reveal was me, the way I carried myself, the way I talked about my work with passion, the way I looked them in the eye, no longer searching for their approval. The climax of the night came when my dad, trying to patch things up, said, "We were just so worried, Alex. We did what we did because we thought it was for the best." 2. Motivate you. I put my fork down. "Let me be very clear," I said, my voice quiet but solid. "You didn't motivate me, you abandoned me. You threw me away because I didn't fit your plan. I am not a success because of what you did. I am a success in spite of what you did. My success was built in homeless shelters and public libraries. It was built with help from strangers who were kinder to me than my own family. My success is mine. You don't get to take any credit for it." The silence that followed was different from the one 3 years ago. This one wasn't filled with my shame. It was filled with theirs. My mom started crying softly. Mark just stared at his plate. My dad looked at me like he was truly seeing me for the first time, not as his failure of a son. But as an adult, he didn't know it all. I didn't stay for dessert. I stood up, thanked them for dinner, and walked out that door. And I felt this incredible sense of release. The wound they'd left would always be a scar, a reminder of where I came from. But it didn't hurt anymore. My journey was incredibly hard, and for a long time, I felt completely alone. One of the biggest things that helped me was hearing from other people and realizing I wasn't the only one. If any part of my story hit home for you, if you've ever felt rejected or had to start over, I want you to know you're not alone either. Share your experience in the comments. Let's build a community of support right here. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. And if you want to follow more of my journey, make sure to subscribe. Driving away from that house, I didn't look back. My birth family might have rejected me, but I'd found a new one. A chosen family of friends, coworkers, and the thousands of people on my platform chasing their own dreams. I realized that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about finding the people who truly see you and support you, even when you can't see it for yourself. The life I have now is one my family could never have imagined from a note, because of the money. But because it's a life I'm living on my own terms. Being kicked out was the worst thing that ever happened to me, but it was also the most freeing. It forced me to find a strength I never knew I had. It taught me that my worth isn't determined by anyone else's opinion. It's determined by my actions and my resilience. They tried to write the end of my story, but they just forced me to write a much better one for myself. And that story is just getting started.